Hi guys, welcome back to the Meaasge Center. I hope you enjoyed the workshop. I hope that gave you some insight into understanding maybe a little bit more about how we're created and different things like that. So now we're diving into some of the Discipleship 101 classes. These are the foundations of the different things that you need to know. And this is just an introduction to kind of give you an idea of the types of things we're going to be looking at. Because I understand that people out there, especially when they're studying the Bible, I've heard different things like, well, the Bible's hard to understand, or there's so much symbolism in there, and there's all these different interpretations, and what it may mean to you may mean here. And I get that. And we're going to be clearing that up through this process, because there's some interesting things that actually happen when you begin to study the Bible. And we'll talk more about that in each of these chapters. So this is kind of like a chapter outline. But first of all, what is the gospel message? You know, that's one of the first things we need to know, because if we don't know that, if we don't believe that, then the kingdom of heaven will not be opened up to us. And this is the very interesting part. So if I'm speaking to you and you're currently a non-believer or someone who's seeking out the truth, bear with me, hold on, stay here, drive through this. Okay? The scripture will prove itself to you as long as you have ears to hear. And what that means is, and we'll discuss this when we talk about why Jesus spoke in parables. He says, and he's speaking to the disciples, and he says, to you it is given to understand these things, but to them it is not. Because seeing they see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. And what that's trying to say is it's not degrading them, or Jesus isn't degrading them because they're just people and they're not disciples. He's saying that they don't hear the message because they haven't received Christ first. They haven't opened up that door. Imagine yourself kind of as a doorway, and you're going to give permission to allow this information in or not allow it in. And so and that's the point. You're actually that choice. That's the tree of knowledge of good and evil that goes all the way back to Genesis. You have a choice of what information you want to receive and believe. And it's only those who make that choice to believe this that it begins to open up to them. And I'm speaking from experience, because I know when I first started studying the Bible years ago, I had questions, and I stood up in my floor in my living room. There was nobody else around, but if people would have seen me, they'd have thought I was an idiot, because I was arguing with the scripture. I was going, this is not what I was taught. This is not what I believe. And he's like, well, this is what I said. And I'm like, wow. Okay, well, and it changes your mind, it changes your heart, but then in the end, it makes more sense. But we have to start with the basics. And that's where I have to start with you. Because I'm going to assume at this point, you're someone who is searching for truth, who's searching for who God is. What is my purpose on this earth? What am I meant to do? I get that, and that's what we're going to talk about. But that begins. There's a scripture verse that says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Okay, now that fear isn't a dreadful fear. It's a respect. It's a reverence. It's a I want to understand this kind of feeling. Okay, that's what that fear of the Lord means. That's the beginning of wisdom. Okay, well, we're going to come back to that scripture, but that's where it all begins, is when you begin to see the difference. Now, I'm going to talk to you also, we're going to talk in another chapter here about contradictions. You know, the Bible, I've heard people say, well, there's so many contradictions in the Bible, you know, that can't be true. And I said the same thing. But when there's a contradiction, or when we see it as a contradiction, there's a nugget in there. Okay, because if you look at the Old Testament, well, in the Old Testament God said this, and in the New Testament God said this. So how can God be the same? It's because here he's speaking possibly to non-believers. Here he's speaking to new believers. And what happens is we're not under the law, now we're under grace. And you'll see different changes because the Bible is a process. Okay, remember I talked to you in videos previously about life is a journey. The Bible is a journey. It's a journey from Adam through the Old Testament. We get to David, the king, to Solomon, what happens when they fall away. Then we get to Christ and the new beginning. Okay, it's a process. And when you wrap your mind around the bigger process, then it begins to make sense. That's why Jesus says he's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Chuck Missler put it this way. This is very helpful. Imagine yourself going to a parade, okay? Christmas parade, take your pick. You're standing on the street corner and you're watching a parade go by. Okay, so you see the floats, and then you see the clowns, and maybe a band, and then another advertisement, and all these different displays, I guess, if you will, rolling displays that go by. Okay, when you can then describe that parade in an order and in a fashion. Okay, but you don't know what's coming. You know, maybe somebody called you on a cell phone and said, hey, you won't believe this when this gets up there, you know, if they're down the road or something. You might get some insight, some prophecy about what's coming. Well, we know usually Santa Claus, which I don't like to mention Santa Claus, but Santa Claus is at the end of the parade, right? Okay, that's what it's all about. We know he's coming. But then he described it like this. He said, imagine you're God. And God is outside of time. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He knows the beginning from the end. So he described it like this. He said, put yourself in a helicopter and go above the parade. You're now hovering above the parade looking down. You're outside of time. And you can see the end from the beginning. Therefore, you're able to put A and C, or A and D, or D. You're able to put these pieces together and explain what's coming. And that's how prophecy happens. Okay? So the Old Testament reveals prophecy, or is prophecy, of what's coming in the future. And then the New Testament then turns around and goes backwards and shows where these prophecies came from. And the two get put together. And the central point of that is the birth, the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we kind of got to come at it, we can come at it from two different ends. But no matter where we start in Scripture, we can go backwards and forwards and put pieces together. And that's how we'll kind of do these lessons. But kind of getting back to the contradictions, there are contradictions. Seemingly contradictions, because like I said, there's nuggets in those. And then another question that people really have a hard time dealing with is, well, if God is love, why is there so much hate in the world? Get that? Fully understand it, and there's a reason for it. And it goes back to in the Genesis connection is when we'll get into studying that in our second series. That'll be a little more in-depth than where we're at right now. But there is room for it. What about, you know, how can God say, thou shalt not kill, and then turn around and send the Israelites, the ones he had brought out of Egypt, to destroy that nation, to destroy every living thing, every person, every child, every animal? How can that be? How can God tell them, thou shalt not kill, and then send them in there to kill? Again, that goes back to Genesis 6, when you begin to look at the story of how these things unfold. That there was something that happened, it's called the iniquity of the Amorites, that took place back in Abraham's days. Okay, so there's a backwards and forwards. And another example of that is, you've probably seen a movie, and it'll be talking about a certain thing, and all of a sudden it'll flash up. It'll do what's called a flashback, and it'll say 6 months before, or 2 years before. And then it'll go back and tell you the story of what happened during that time frame. So now this makes sense. That happens a lot in Scripture, with prophecy looking forward and then fulfillment of prophecy looking backward. That's one of the things you have to filter out. Not filter out, but you have to work through. And that's what this is going to help you do, is help you study that. But it all boils down to this. You're going to have legitimate questions, but your answers are only going to come to you when you are truthfully seeking them with a heartfelt condition. And that's what this first part is the gospel message. We've got to get there first, because if you don't, if your motive is to prove the Bible wrong and stand your ground, you'll never see it. If your true heartfelt motive is to discover the truth within the Scripture, it will be opened up to you. Jesus says, when you seek me, you will find me. Okay, would any man whose son asked them for bread, would he give them a stone? No. But he understands the thoughts and intentions of your heart. You saw that in our model. When we discussed the model, it is the center core of our being. And it's only until we open that door with sincerity that the answers begin to come. And I'm not going to try to overwhelm you here, that's for sure. But that's where we're going here. We're going to look at the gospel message, contradictions, then we're going to get into how to study the Bible in the next course. Okay, so with that, I will end this introduction, and we'll begin on what is the gospel message. And I've got that queued up for you here in just a moment.